Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brian Robson. I'm Director of Policy and Public Affairs at the Northern Housing Consortium. And thank you very much for attending the latest webinar in our North Net Zero series of events. Since the beginning of September, each week we've been looking at various challenges and opportunities, and I think there are a lot of opportunities out there around decarbonising the North's existing housing stock and the wider climate change agenda. This work has been supported by our programme partners, who are Halton Housing, Liverpool City Region Housing Associations, 13, Together Group and Consortium Procurement. And I'm incredibly grateful to those partners. Not only are they making this webinar series possible, they're also supporting our wider policy and influencing work on decarbonisation. So over the last few weeks, we've had webinars on retrofit, on home energy systems, on financing energy efficiency. And I think we've established a consensus that decarbonising our existing housing stock is a real widely shared ambition across the North. It's not a matter of if we do this, it's a question about how we do this. And today we're moving the conversation on and we're looking at how we decarbonise our neighbourhoods and how we make sure that the efforts we make to decarbonise our homes are also reflected neighbourhoods in which those homes are situated. And I think this is so important. You know, we had the Decent Homes Standard in the 2000s, and we did loads of really good work to bring homes up to scratch, to increase the quality of homes. But I think one of the challenges around that was that we didn't manage to make the breakthrough into the wider neighbourhood as much as we would have liked, and the programme came to an end before that work really happened. So retrofitting whole neighbourhoods, working with local people, working with their ideas and skills, and create healthy, sustainable communities that are more resilient to the effects of climate change, and really importantly, can provide tangible benefits for the residents and the local area. So I'm sure we can all think of ways in which wide-scale retrofitting of existing homes and buildings can transform areas in terms of their look and feel, in terms of revitalising a wider neighbourhood and enhance the standard of living for the people we serve. So today, we're bringing together a range of stakeholders from inside and outside the sector, inside and outside the North, to discuss some of the approaches adopted in retrofitting neighbourhoods and building the resilience of localities and the wider benefits this brings. Really good session. We're running now until 2:30. I really encourage you to participate in this session. It shouldn't just be about listening. It's about asking questions and engaging in discussion. We'll be tweeting the highlights of the event, so do join in the discussion using the hashtag #OurNorth, all one word. And a recording and a write-up of the event will be available later this week, so do share that with colleagues when it comes out. You can participate in 3 other ways using Zoom. So you can use the Q&A function to ask questions. And if you see a question and you think, oh, that's what I would have asked, then you can upvote that question and shove it up the pecking order and ensure it gets asked. You can also respond to questions yourself. So if you know the answer to a question that somebody else has asked in the Q&A, please do offer your perspective. You can also offer your thoughts and engage with each other using the chat box. Comments will be picked up by NHC staff. My colleagues Sati and Liam are on the call, and they'll flag these up and we can discuss that with the speakers. And if you would like to offer your thoughts and pose questions directly, you can appear on the webinar and switch on your camera if you're willing to. If you're willing to do that, then please do raise your hand. And again, my colleagues will bring you into the webinar to speak. If we do have time towards the end of the webinar, we'll try and create more of a kind of roundtable atmosphere and have a bit of discussion. Again, if you'd like to take part in that, please do raise your hand to be brought in the webinar. It's a really great opportunity for NHC members to come together and share their views. So I really would encourage you to take part, and we'll make more of that hopefully if we do take part. So without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Dr. Brenda Boardman, who is Emeritus Fellow in Low Carbon Futures at the Environmental Change Institute at the University of Oxford. Brenda's research focus is on how to achieve demand reduction in energy across the UK, but in particular in the built environment. Brenda's going to speak to you for around 15 minutes, and then she has 5 minutes for questions. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Brenda, who is going to use slides, I believe.
Thank you very much, Brian. It's good to see you all and to be talking. The approach that I'm going to take is not about individual properties. It's very definitely about the neighbourhood approach. And it's a set of ideas that I want to sort of float in your direction. It's not something I've done a lot of research on, but I think it's very pertinent at the moment, if we are post-COVID. And it focuses on some of the other energy uses that we have apart from energy in the home, for instance, transport. Okay, Sati, thanks. I just want to introduce a general principle from fuel poverty, which many of you will have worked on, and I certainly have. And when you look at anything to do with low incomes and energy, you're focusing very definitely on two sets of expenditure. The first is the running costs, the daily expenditure. And we know lots about that. But what I really want to highlight is the importance of the capital expenditure in making things more energy efficient in the home, the insulation, the efficient boiler. Now, if you're in rented accommodation, the landlord's responsible, and if you're on a low income and you own your own property, then we need grants. But what we know from fuel poverty is that capital expenditure is crucial. You can't make the home more energy efficient, not really, without capital expenditure. And that capital cannot come from the household, so it can't, because they don't have the money. So it can't be the responsibility of the fuel poor where that capital comes from. Thanks, Sati. And with that in mind, I want to now look at what I'm calling travel poverty. It's not a well-known concept. It's probably quite a substantially different group of people to fuel poverty. But I've put here again the running costs and the capital expenditure subdivision, and I've divided it between those households with a car and those households without a car. And very definitely what I want to focus on today are the problems of how you help people without a car who aren't traveling very much. They are on a low income. They have difficulty getting to employment. They have to rely on expensive or perhaps infrequent bus services. So what do we mean by capital expenditure for those households? We do not mean giving them a car. We do not mean new roads. We do not mean electrifying the railways. But that capital expenditure, that box for no car capital expenditure, is what I'm talking about, because it's got to be other people, and it's not very clear what it is. Thanks, Sati. Okay, so what do I mean roughly by who's travel poor? And these are some statistics. It's very difficult to get a coherent set, but for instance, in England in 2018, 24% of households on any income had no car. That's a quarter of all households. And don't forget, in a household there may be at least two adults. 50% of households in social housing, so it's many of your clients, do not own a car. Half of the people that some of you are helping with don't have a car. Neither of the adults have access to it. A separate group, but it overlaps, 25% of those aged 17 and over do not have a driving license. There's no way they could drive even if there were special schemes to help them drive. And actually, of course, what we want is less driving. As I sort of inferred, if it's a car-owning household and one adult has taken the car, the second adult may well be stuck at home without access to good transport. The result of all of this is a whole group of people, and it's got wobbly boundaries all over the place, a whole group of people for whom traveling around to amenities and facilities is difficult. So for instance, if you're in a rural area, a poor household will travel half the distance to a better off household, and that's particularly to health facilities. They're much less likely to go to the doctor or the hospital. And if it is a low-income household that owns a car, frequently their budget is under very severe stress just to be able to run a car. So this is a group of people we don't often look at, and yet the whole issue of adequate transport, carbon emissions, nitrogen dioxide emissions, and transports there. Thanks, Sati. So the thing I want to talk to you about, I know it says in the details it's a 20-minute neighbourhood, and it is an area that I'm looking at, fairly new set of research interests. It used to be, we used to call it the 20-minute neighbourhood, based on the experience in Melbourne, until I realised that in Melbourne they meant 20 minutes there and back, so it was actually really a 10-minute neighbourhood. And we've done a bit of talking, and it's a very loose definition, but basically what we're looking at is trying to make sure that people have the main facilities that they want within a 15-minute walk of their home. That's probably less than a mile for most of us, but maybe quite a lot of people will be able to walk there 15 minutes and back 15 minutes. Now, what do I mean by facilities? And I don't think there's going to be a clear definition of this, and it may even be household specific. But access to cash, I know we're using less cash, but we still need some. It always strikes me as terrible that some villages have no ATMs at all. Would it be to get your hair cut? Do you want a mobile library or mobile vet or doctor? A primary school? It might be your local church, somewhere where you can buy some of the essentials. That might be a newspaper, it might be a hammer and nails. It may be somewhere that sells local food. It may just be sitting very pleasantly in a green open space. I don't think it matters what they are, but you can begin to see how recreating a neighbourhood has a lot of meanings for different people, and they're not the sort of things we've been focusing on for very much. And as I say, I think it's locality and household specific. The 15 minutes is the walk from your home. So even it's not 15 minutes from the shops to everybody, it's 15 minutes from each home. If you've got a compass, you've put the point on your property. Thanks, Sati. So what can we do more to support this neighbourhood? I think it should be a much stronger focus on safe routes, particularly to secondary school, where the kids go on their own. What I've called new greenways, if it's a school in a rural area, and comprehensive bus services. Too often, the local roads are not safe to cycle on, so the children don't do that. And that encourages the parents, if they can get a car, to go to school in the car. More on-demand community transport options. So, for instance, the Pick Me Up, you can dial a local bus service, or there are volunteers who will take you to hospital. One of the positives that's occurring at the moment is that is the whole issue of online purchases. We've done much more of that since COVID, and that obviously is good for people, especially in rural areas, but it does encourage the couriers in their individual diesel vans to go careering around the country, which isn't so good for the environment. So perhaps what we need is a focus on consolidating those purchases, so only one courier comes to each village. And I'm not just talking about villages, I am talking about areas within a town, but rural villages are obviously an extreme example. And we definitely need excellent broadband for anybody who wants to work at home, be able to go shop, or even Zoom. Thanks, Sati. So the benefits of the 15-minute neighbourhoods, I think the benefits have become clear to all of us just recently, since March. Excuse me. You build a much stronger sense of community. It is everybody working together. Excuse me a minute. More people able to work at home, which has many advantages. It supports the local economy by creating extra jobs, for instance, on local food. Sorry, I'm sure it's not COVID, but just me. Very definitely, the money that's spent in the local community is money that's been earned for and within the local community. There's less need to export it, whether it's energy or food or whatever it is. And you need to spend less on travel. It's a very good way of revitalizing a community. It's definitely healthier. There'll be less air pollution and more walking. There's less use of cars, less congestion in urban areas. And I think it just fits with the zeitgeist that we've got at the moment, that we're working together in our local area. As far as climate change is concerned, it's an interesting equation. You will have some extra energy costs because of working at home and heating it probably for longer. Those will be offset by reduced travel at the household level, probably. But the real benefits come if you can close the office. It might result in hot desking, but if you just heat all the extra homes and don't close the office, then you haven't got a climate change benefit. Okay, Sati. Thank you. That's me done.
Thanks, Brenda. That was really, really interesting. I think for me, it brings together a number of agendas that our sector's engaged with over the years. So there's clearly the climate change piece. I guess there's an immediate response to COVID piece in that we found ourselves working in this way to some extent already. And I think the other thing that brought to mind for me was the work that we've done in the past on the poverty premium. So that, you know, some people by virtue of their location end up paying more for goods and services, more to access cash, more to, to purchase food at corner shops or so on, rather than being able to access a supermarket where things might be cheaper and so on. So it just seems to me to kind of bring together a number of agendas that could be really positive for the people we work with. Sati, have we got any questions coming through for Brenda specifically?
No, not yet. Oh, hang on, there we go. Sorry, here we go. I'll just read it out for you.
Thank you.
It's just come in right now. When it comes to making sure people on lower incomes in smaller communities can work at home, how do you think this can be achieved when many low income households rely on work in areas where this is difficult, such as the service industry or 0-hour contracts?
A very good question, but quite a lot of people who are not going to work from home by sitting at a computer have got those totally essential skills, such as able to retrofit homes, help with homes, gardens, drive coaches for minibuses for the community, or even help in running the local shop. So that I don't think it's totally cut and dried that you need to be working at home, sitting at a computer. I think there are other things in the local community that you can do. I hope so.
I think it comes back to this point you made early on, Brenda, about transport poverty as well. You know, that buses outside London at least are increasingly expensive if they're available at all. And a lot of our local authority members, through austerity, support subsidy for less well-used public transport services. It's been one of the things that's taken the hit. So those bus services might be very infrequent, or if indeed.
And certainly what's happening around in Oxfordshire is that, especially with reduced county council support, the bus companies are cutting services rather than increasing them, which of course is heartbreaking.
And then I guess it's a trade-off for people between perhaps cheaper housing that's further away from these kind of opportunities, or paying perhaps a little bit more for their housing to be in reach of these opportunities. It's a very difficult choice to have to make, particularly if it means being overcrowded or living in poorer quality.
Yes, I know that in rural areas in particular that many people, especially because they've got a detached house rather than a terraced house or something, have got high rates of heat loss. But equally, perhaps, if we can find good sources of local wood or similar. I went to Stroud on one occasion and was introduced to a wood-burning brick that was made from sawdust, and it came from the local timber yard, but it was made into bricks by the prisoners. And if the local community could sell enough of them, then lower income households got them for free.
Wow. Okay. And I don't know if you've been following this debate around low traffic neighbourhoods and the kind of the way that local authorities are kind of, as I understand it, kind of introducing cells where you can access a property and then go out the same way, but you can't use it as a cut through. Do you have views on that? Does that play a role in this?
I think yes, I think low traffic neighbourhoods are absolutely brilliant, and the main driving force is usually to exclude the rat run, so that anybody who drives through finds that virtually impossible. And you can do it relatively quickly and easily by putting up, planters, or it doesn't have to be a bollard, it can be a planter, something attractive. And that also fits in well with school streets and the idea that you don't have cars going past the schools and delivering children or picking up children from outside, especially with idling cars, and causing more pollution and ill health for the kids. And again, it's a focus on active travel, more walking, more cycling, which we've all been doing since COVID. We've all, I think, discovered that we're quite happy doing a bit more activity as our movement, especially if you can do it and get locally to the facilities that are important to you.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Well, I don't think we've got any more questions coming through just now, but can we leave it there, Brenda, and we'll bring you back into the group chat later on. Our next speakers are Helen Grimshaw, who is a senior consultant at Urbanism, Environment and Design, and she's going to be joined by Catherine Simmons, who is a project manager at the Hornbaked Community Land Trust over in Liverpool. So Helen specialises in sustainability and works on a range of projects supporting urban design and master planning. She's going to share some learning from some of the projects she's been involved with, including post-occupancy evaluations and learning from Cumbria's flood resilience project. As I say, Catherine's from the Hornbaked CLT. As a Sunderland fan, I'm not going to be visiting Anfield anytime soon. I mean, I doubt anybody is, given the restrictions at the moment. But if you do visit Anfield for an away game, if you are a Premier League fan, then Hornbaked CLT is just opposite Liverpool Football Club. And I've heard tremendous stories about the pie shop there and the tremendous pies that they produce, which I'm told have to be tasted to be believed. So hopefully one day when Sunderland are back in the Premier League, I will get to partake in that. It might be a few years off yet for me. So without further ado, and I've shown any more pain about my football team's ups and downs, I'll hand over to Helen and Catherine to present to you. Over to you.
Thanks very much for inviting us. Apologies in advance if there's any drilling noise. One of the perils of working from home for me at the minute is my neighbours doing building work for about 4 months. I'm Helen, so I work at Urbed. I'm going to do the kind of first section, and then I'll hand over to Catherine, who'll tell you a bit more about Hornbaked, which is a project we've been working together on over the last few years. So I work at Urbed crosses a range of different scales, so right from spatial frameworks at a regional level through to building level strategies, and I very much believe that kind of our work at these different scales informs the others. So what I'm particularly interested in is how kind of this learning at a building and kind of street scale can inform a lot of other things. So there's kind of two areas that I wanted to touch on today, which are around overheating and flooding, and which kind of I'm a firm believer need to be tackled not only at kind of this building level, but also at kind of from a neighbourhood approach. Post-occupancy and building performance evaluation are definitely key to this. So understanding what does and doesn't work well on completed projects is really important. So we don't keep on repeating mistakes, but also so we don't end up creating perverse outcomes. So, we might provide an instance where we think we're kind of maximising daylight and we're improving well-being for our residents in that respect, but actually it can create these kind of unintended consequences in terms of overheating. So yeah, the first example being around overheating. So climate change means we can generally expect hotter, drier summers and warmer, wetter winters. And I think contrary to the pictures the news always chooses to go with when there's a heat wave of people kind of on deck chairs on the beach or children frolicking in fountains, you know, these are actually dangerous temperatures that our buildings and health services are not currently well equipped to deal with. So, you know, it leads to situations where the heat waves, I think there were 3 heat wave events last year, and there's over 800 excess deaths from those events. But then there's a whole raft of other health impacts, you know, that those high temperatures cause. So overheating, it's happening now in new build and in existing homes. So this is data from some post-occupancy that we did on a small infill scheme. So it included refurbishment of some Victorian houses, and it included some new build apartments to the rear. And this can tell us lots about whether the layout, the building form, the fabric and the ventilation strategies are minimising that risk or they're actually causing an issue. And arguably the most valuable data that we get on this is that's reported by residents. So in this case, we knew from the occupants that they were experiencing high temperatures, and then this was supplemented with monitoring equipment that we managed to put in a couple of homes. So we can see here that in the refurb in particular, you know, we were looking at this in this particularly hot period in June a few years ago, temperatures of nearly 28 degrees C at midnight, rising to a high of 41 degrees at midday. And that sharp peak, we think, may have been because the logger was in the path of direct sunlight. But regardless of that, you know, we can see that the temperatures in that apartment were at 30 degrees C plus kind of long after sunset. And although the new build element was kind of a bit smoother in terms of temperature profile, you know, we're still looking at high temperatures around 29 degrees C internally. So the overheating guidance and toolkit commissioned by the Good Homes Alliance, I think, is a really good example of how we need to be thinking about issues like overheating at a range of scales. So not just when it comes to the building design, but we, you know, also need to be thinking about the geography. So whereabouts in the UK is it? Is it in an area that's likely to experience the urban heat island effect? Are there green and blue surroundings? The site matters. So if it's adjacent to somewhere where we might experience a lot of noise that might actually put people off from ventilating their home to the same extent. Likewise, if you're next to a main road where there's kind of real air quality issues, you might be inclined to not open windows. Also, if you kind of had security and safety concerns as well. And then the type of scheme matters, so the building form, what type of heating system it uses, how the building is constructed, so how it uses thermal mass and ceiling heights, and then also other things, you know, like the orientation of the streets, the blocks, and glazing ratios. So this diagram is from recent post-occupancy that I've done on a residential scheme in Glasgow. So we were able to actually see there that about 25% of that west-facing elevation was glazed area, quite large windows, but only a small proportion of those windows were openable. And there were kind of multiple reported overheating issues from residents. And when you compare that with kind of the guidance from the Letty Climate Emergency Design Guide, which is a really excellent resource that I'd recommend, we can see there that they kind of suggest that what we need to be doing is looking at more like kind of 10 to 15% of glazing, rather than this kind of 25%. So the next example is flooding, and it's highly likely that the number of days with heavy rainfall will increase. This means we're likely to be contending with more flood events. So in Cumbria, you know, the people over the last kind of 10 years have experienced, you know, multiple severe flood events. And that's from kind of obvious sources such as rivers, but also I think we are going to be increasingly dealing with surface water flooding issues. So some statistics here around what happened in Cumbria following the 2015 flood events, where the average domestic claim there was £50,000. Displacement and hardship. So, you know, people there were unable to move back into their homes, you know, over a year later, and all the kind of emotional and practical implications of that. And then the environmental impact as well. So we found that kind of waste to landfill from one flood event, so in terms of refitting that home to get someone back in there, that could add as much as a third to a home's annual carbon emissions from kind of drying out, but also waste to landfill was equivalent to what that household might generate in 1 year. And our research for Cumbria Action for Sustainability, which this project was part of, we were looking at kind of that environmental cost of flood recovery, how we might reduce that, but also kind of the success or otherwise of some of the grants that were designed to improve flood resilience at a property level. So in terms of reinstatement, we found that overwhelmingly the kind of dominant approach is one of like-for-like replacement, so kind of reinstating that house to as it was before. But obviously there's kind of a lot of disadvantages to that when you've got the threat of repeat flood. You know, if 2 years later you have a significant flood issue again, you're going to be in exactly the same position, having to strip everything out and put it back in. What the grants were quite successful at were enabling people to improve their kind of resilience slightly by incorporating mostly resistance measures. So this would be things designed to primarily keep the water out. And they're quite simple things, quite often, like air brick covers, kind of waterproofing treatments to the outside of the house, barriers, flood doors and windows, that type of thing. What we probably actually really need to be moving towards is a more resilient approach, which kind of accepts that you're going to let the water in, but it does allow you to clean up much easier and more quickly get back into the home. So that includes things like making your electrical circuits more resilient by moving them up the wall, changing your floor finishes, so having kind of tiled, waterproofed grout, and changing the type of plaster as well, so that it's more able to dry out quickly. And what we found as well was that actually what the flood resilient stuff, we really need to be thinking beyond the building as well. So there are some really good examples, particularly from Cumbria, of, you know, collections of homes that have worked together to not only do property level resilience, but also to think about how they might slow or stop water from kind of flowing down their street. But also kind of able to mobilise much better as well. So to work together to kind of standardise the measures, but also understand how they're used, so that everyone, when the flood event happens, they can be much quicker to react. And then I think what we often fail to do, particularly around flooding, is to exploit the opportunities we get through kind of neighbourhood-based schemes, which is thinking about how we might use elements like landscaping to create this multifunctional benefit. So rather than viewing landscape as kind of a bolt-on at the end, you know, why are we not considering it as habitat, you know, biodiversity, providing people with a connection to nature, also a way of kind of cooling, urban heat island effects, water management, so kind of, you know, removing that runoff, improving water quality, and also, you know, things like air quality benefits as well. So I think rather than kind of doing that thing that I think we're quite good at as an industry in thinking in silos and kind of the highways doing their thing and the urban designers doing their thing, is that much more kind of holistic approach to this. So in summary, we believe that any approach to retrofitting neighbourhoods needs to go hand in hand with kind of health and well-being. So obviously the zero carbon part is incredibly important, but also how we build resilience and adaptation has to be part of it too. So now I'll pass you over to Catherine, who will share a bit about HomeBit and give you kind of the client perspective on this.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I work for HomeBit Community Land Trust, which I think is quite a good example of retrofitting neighbourhoods being driven by the community. So what you see here in the picture is a terrace on Oakfield Road. In the background is Anfield, LFC, as Brian referenced. And the Community Land Trust came about back in 2012 as a community response to failed regeneration in the area. It was originally a housing market renewal area, hence the boarded up terrace. And the community got a bit fed up of being done to, and then the area basically being left behind. And through their actions, ended up setting up a community land trust to retain asset for the benefit of the community, and met in what was a former bakery, and so decided that was going to become a business. Local people were saying that's what they wanted. They were missing those sort of resources in the area. So a bit like what Brenda was saying about having facilities on your doorstep. So the bakery set up in 2012, now employs a lot of local people, generates a lot of community benefit with local spend. And the Community Land Trust set up in order to secure the assets for the benefit of the community. So they started with the refurbishment to create the bakery space, created a flat above the bakery, and their next stage, their next vision is to develop this terrace with the intention of then moving on further along Oakfield, because you've got a lot of dereliction and boarded up space within this community. So thank you. So the vision was to do a mixed use development for the terrace. The Community Land Trust, their broad idea was that they just want to create space for quality living, working and playing, and appointed Airbed to come in and work with local residents around what that actually meant for them. But the ambition was to basically achieve a high quality development on the high street, mixed use, create a buzz in that space, create quality housing, but also space for local community businesses. So not just home-baked cooperative, which is the bakery, which has gone from strength to strength, but also there's an organisation called Homegrown Collective, who started as a horticulture project under the CLT, dealing with the green space at the end of the terrace, and they've now developed into a woman-only brewing company. So I don't think it's deliberately women-only, but that's how it's turned out to be. And they're going to take over the space at the end. So the idea was that there'd be those activities, and that those spaces wouldn't just be offering products, they would also be delivering a service and creating space for the community. So the Airbed worked with a core design group of residents who really their priority was looking at the environmental impact of this development, and also they wanted to address fuel poverty. This is a really low value area in terms of value of property, so it's quite a challenge really to come up with a scheme that is actually going to address that in a quality way that's still going to be affordable. It sort of goes a bit back to what Brenda was saying about the requirement for grants. You've got to front that capital investment in order to make it happen. But the aim was to address environmental issues, address fuel poverty, create something that was really different and beautiful in that area to address people's health and well-being, so they felt positive about it, they had quality space to live in, and made best use of the actual location of where this is, because although it's an urban area, there is some green space around it as well. So Airbed worked with the residents to look at what that would, how that would be, how to make best use of the aspects of the building, solar paneling because of the south-facing rear, all sorts of aspects like that. So you can see here the idea that it's either end of the terrace is community businesses, so they bookend it with a mixture of houses and flats within the development. Leave this with the residents in terms of their concerns around fuel poverty, and as well as the environmental impact, was taking a fabric first approach. And the fact that they've done that and worked with the residents so that there's a genuine understanding there amongst the community around how one element of refurbishment impacts on something else, so that they see it as a whole package, the way that this development's been put together, and the whole design of it to reduce environmental impact, but also to reduce demand for fuel and energy. And at the moment, I think they're looking at the aim is that actually it's about 80% less demand for fuel, the way that the properties have been designed, but Helen will probably know much better than that. But it's fantastic the way that it's pulled all these agendas together, but actually being driven by that community. And our challenge now is to finance that project, because although it's a priority for everybody, it's difficult to get the resources to address that.
Yep. Well, so that's it. Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
I'm not sure anything's come through the chat yet, so do please pop your questions in the chat for Helen and Catherine. I mean, the thing that struck me there was just, well, I mean, it was really useful how to get that reminder that climate change isn't just about cold homes, you know, that there's an overheating aspect to this as well, and flooding and kind of, you know, climate resilience as well as climate change. And then just that huge holistic range of benefits that both of you referred to. You know, we've got jobs, biodiversity, kind of green space, you know, revitalising the look and feel of neighbourhoods, tackling poverty, improving people's health. There's so much there. And Catherine, I wonder if you might talk a bit more about the kind of funding challenges you're facing with that, and kind of how easy it is to ensure all that, what really wide range of benefits is reflected in some of the quite narrow funding streams that are presumably open to you.
Yeah, I mean, as a community land trust, we were hoping to access community housing fund monies through Homes England. Now, obviously that stopped, but there's a real push nationally to get that reinstated, and home-based CLT is going to progress to register as an RP so that we can access monies. But in the meantime, we're partnering with the Housing Association, with Your Housing Group, so they draw the funding down. But the percentage levels of grant rate were higher under the community-led the community-led housing fund than they are under mainstream Homes England funding. So that's the massive challenge for us, because it's such a low value area. Sort of loan to value rates mean that whilst we can get a loan against the development costs for the scheme, it only takes us so far. The grant from HE only takes us a little bit further, and so the CLT's now got the real big challenge of trying to secure additional grants, which at the moment under COVID, a lot of programs have been closed or halted because they're just focusing on COVID issues and service delivery and emergency actions. So like the Lottery Fund, Power to Change, places like that where we would ordinarily approach are closed at the moment, but they may open. And we're also looking to change our governance so that we can be a community benefit society and launch a community share offer. And we want to do a really substantial share offer. We've got a target of 450,000 for that. And that's because we want to stick with those principles. We don't want to go out to tender and look at it and go, we're going to have to shave things off and start messing around with the specification, because, you know, it is, because it's the fabric first retrofit approach, the minute you start playing with one thing, it has a knock-on effect. And we know that in the longer term and the longer term benefit of that investment at the early stage, at the capital investment stage, is quite massive. But it's really quite difficult for people to buy into that argument. It's like, well, yeah, we agree with you. We know it's social return on investment is amazing, but actually this is all the money you can have. So yeah, so because we're a community-based organisation, we can look at other avenues, but it's incredibly challenging. Yeah.
I know the National Community Land Trust Network are pushing really hard, aren't they, on that community, to get that community fund extended.
Yeah.
Helen, there's a question come through for you in the Q&A. This question asks, do you think the government's recent retrofit package will fully consider issues like indoor air quality and overheating, or do you think they'll just stick to the narrative of decreasing fuel poverty by improving insulation? How, I guess,
Yeah.
holistic is this going to be?
Yeah, so I think what's been referred to there is the Green Home Grant Scheme, which is this thing about £5,000 for owner-occupiers to access. And yeah, I think sadly, so I think they released the details of that a couple of weeks ago, and it is quite narrow in scope, and I think there's a lot of us in the industry are quite sceptical about how much kind of quality work will actually get done through that scheme, because the timescales are tight as well. But yeah, I think one of the most beneficial things they could have done with that would have been to allowed it to have been used for kind of ventilation improvements. Particularly kind of COVID wise, we know that kind of poorly ventilated indoor spaces are a key issue for the airborne spread of the virus, but also kind of things like general indoor air quality and overheating as well. So I think the idea in principle, to offer that support as also as like a stimulus for the supply chain was good, but I think with kind of the restrictions in terms of the timescale and gearing up the supply chain to actually deliver that work to a good standard, I think it will be incredibly challenging. So I'm a little bit sceptical, unfortunately.
And then a question I think either of you might want to jump in on. Somebody's asked Craig, I believe, how much per unit is this going to be in terms of costs with the Hornbeck scheme? Just looking back, kind of some of the housing renewal Pathfinder properties had, kind of structural defects that required a lot of investment in them, and obviously now they've been vacant for some time. And just the question is, kind of would it have been more cost effective to demolish and rebuild so that you could design in kind of fabric first measures from the start?
There was actually a feasibility done by Hornbeck several years ago now around demolition and new build on that site, because it's actually in the ownership of Liverpool City Council, and that was their preferred option at the time, but that didn't stack up. To be honest, I think it's challenging whichever way you look at it, really. I'm just trying to think what the figures are exactly. I mean, it's over 100k a unit, well over 100k a unit. So it's certainly not a cheap scheme. I mean, we're looking to find 1.6 million. So there's 8 properties and 3 commercial spaces being produced through that. So yeah, it's not cheap, but then neither was the new build option. And again, maybe it's about the standards that the community are expecting for it, but I think the other side of things is, why shouldn't they? Why shouldn't schemes of this quality be able to be built in low value neighbourhoods? It doesn't feel as if that's the right way to assess the value of something. It's better to assess it in a much broader way in terms of its longer term impact. Because the bakery, for example, employs over more than 10 local people. They've taken people on who are sort of furthest from the job market. They take people on contracts and hours that fit their care responsibilities, for example. They've all been trained, upskilled. There's very much that recycling of local spend. So the impact of just one little bakery within that community is massive. And we feel the same way about the terrace itself.
Yeah, I guess it comes back to Brenda's point about if we do this in places that are connected and have things around them, it's so much more, holistically green than doing it on green fields that might be simpler sites to start again on. And thank you both so much for your presentations. Let's bring you back in with Brenda towards the end. We've got one more speaker to hear from before we do have that panel session. And that's Stephen Broadbent, who is a planning officer on urban design at the City of Bradford Metropolitan District Council. And Stephen's got a real passion for making places better for people and the environment through good design. And he's been leading Bradford Council's Design Quality Fund programme, which has included training for staff and elected members, and a master plan for a new city centre neighbourhood, and a homes and neighbourhoods design guide. So we're hoping he's going to talk to us Stephanie about the council's homes and neighbourhoods guide to design in Bradford, which really is intended to produce places where people can flourish. Over to you, Stephen.
There we go. Yeah, I'm going to talk about our new homes and neighbourhoods design guide, which the council adopted it in February of this year, so it's still quite new. And it's a planning document to be used in informing designs, discussions and decisions on new housing development across our district. So I'll just start with setting a bit of context. That's just a plan showing where Bradford is, for those who might not be aware. We're in the heart of this band of towns and cities across the north. Those lines are just showing routes of a potential high-speed northern powerhouse rail line, which we're hoping could have a transformative impact for the city. We're one of the largest urban authorities in England, and also one of the fastest growing as well. We're actually the youngest city in the UK in terms of the number of people under 18, and also a very diverse population. Over a third of people are from BME communities. A variety of landscapes, 2/3 of the district are rural, and settlements as well, from cities to market towns and villages. And also we've got some of the most prosperous areas in the country, but also some of the most deprived wards in the country as well. So we saw this Homes and Neighbourhoods Design Guide as a way of tackling some of the key challenges that we face in the district, particularly around things like health and the need to get people living more active lifestyles, and a particular issue around child health, which is obviously really given the age profile of our district. An increasing population of older people as well, and the implications that has in terms of being able to have a quality of life within their communities and neighbourhoods as they get older. Air quality is a really pressing issue in parts of the district. Inequality between different parts of the district, again, between those wards which are most deprived and those which are most prosperous, and the differences between life expectancy and access to green space, that sort of thing. And also climate change, as a district, we've seen the impacts of flooding in the district. So we've already got some great neighbourhoods in Bradford. This is an example of one of them, Saltaire, which was a finalist in the Academy of Urbanism's Great Neighbourhood Awards a few years back. I think what makes it a great neighbourhood, it touches on a lot of the things Brenda was talking about earlier, in terms of it's got this real sort of connected network of streets, which you can see in the centre of the photograph there, which create a really sort of walkable, permeable neighbourhood. It's got high streets with local shops, cafes, community buildings and education, schools, college, health centres there. It's got a train station and good bus services as well. It's got parks and green spaces, around the river, which you can see to the bottom of the picture there. And they also provide links into the wider countryside and nature. There's employment there, the mill building, which you can sort of see towards the bottom left of the picture there. That's the original mill building, which has been converted to or repurposed for offices and tech companies, amongst other things. And there's a variety of housing in terms of type, size and tenure. And it's got a distinctive character and sense of place as well. I mean, there are some issues here around things like air quality alongside the main roads that pass through the neighbourhood, and things like rat running and speed traffic. So maybe a low traffic neighbourhood, as we discussed earlier in the session, might be something to explore. But it sort of looks like a really sensible and logical way to organise a neighbourhood for human beings to live in. But it's actually very rare, these type of places. In terms of, you've probably got about a 5-10 minute walk to all the facilities. And you know, although over the last few decades we've seen plenty of good developments and good housing schemes, for example, we've not seen the creation of new great neighbourhoods at all. These are just some recent examples of housing development in the district, which were completed just before we did the Homes and Neighbourhoods Guide, assessed with Building for Life tool. And there's some things that are working well in terms of the design of the buildings, creating interest and character, the way they sort of relate to the streets and the spaces there and incorporate landscape elements. But there's real issues as well. A big one is that developments don't tend to connect well to each other, or to public transport and local facilities and the open countryside as well. And where links are provided, they're often not very clear, not easy or obvious to get to, and not very attractive. And they don't really encourage people to use them, and encourage people to walk and exercise rather than taking a journey in a car. And similarly, open spaces aren't as well thought out as they could be in terms of providing different functions and being a real focus to the development. So that's where our Homes and Neighbourhoods Design Guide came in. As I said before, we're a really fast-growing district, and there's a need for thousands of new homes across the district over the next few years. The exact figure keeps changing. Opportunity to harness it in terms of renewing and enhancing our neighbourhoods in the city, and addressing some of those challenges that I mentioned earlier around health, air quality, climate change, and looking at how new development could help in that respect. So we've got plans for new neighbourhoods in the district, but probably the bulk of development is going to happen in neighbourhoods we've already got, those existing neighbourhoods. So this guide, it was funded via an award from the government's Planning and Delivery Fund, and we commissioned a team of Tibbles and urban design skills to work with and produce the document. So the next few slides are just going to be some double-page spreads taken from the document that we'll just talk around. Engagement and involving people was a big thing in producing this guide. Included workshops with departments across the council. Yeah.
Stephen, sorry to interrupt. You seem to be having a bit of issue with the sound. I wonder if you might try turning your camera off and just see if that improves the sound quality.
Yeah, sure. Sorry.
That'll be all right. Sorry, just to free up a bit of bandwidth, see if that makes any difference.
Right. Is that any better?
That sounds better to me. Yeah, let's give that a try.
Okay, right. I'll try and crack on. Yeah, what I was saying was that engagement and involvement were a big feature of preparing the guide for us. That included partners across the council and also wider stakeholders and community interests. And that included Born in Bradford, a big research organisation who were doing research into the links between childhood health and the built environment. It included an older and disabled people group, the Civic Society, and also the house builders in the district and property interests as well, to get that sort of holistic view. And what came out of that was that there was lots of sort of common similarities between the different agendas, and what worked in terms of creating a healthier environment also worked in terms of improving air quality, improved in terms of adapting and mitigating climate change, and creating an attractive place, which and that's born in the priorities and vision that we came up with, which is that's a list of priorities for Bradford District neighbourhoods down the right-hand side. And some really important things about is connected
Stephen, I think we've lost you now altogether. I don't know if that's just me.
Can you not hear me? Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's better, Steve. Yeah.
What you can hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, I'll keep going.
Sorry.
Nice, fine. Yeah, the guide's split into 3 parts. The first part is about process and about developers having early discussions with us, properly assessing the site and the neighbourhood within it, where it sits, and developing a concept for the site based on that. Part 2, which this is showing an overview of it, is about creating the neighbourhood, and that's about taking a holistic view to all the aspects that go into creating successful places, the streets, the open spaces, how you deal with water and drainage, biodiversity play, having a mix of house types, the built form, and how to accommodate things like parking and the bins. And then part 3 is more focused on the actual home itself, and the layout of the home, the outdoor space of the home. So these are just some examples of the principles in the guide. This is about creating green streets, which is about having this connected network of clear, accessible streets, and also making them green in response to things like the health agenda, air quality, climate change. And that can involve things like street trees, grass verges, open spaces alongside the streets, using hedgerows for garden boundaries, having landscape front gardens, for example. Incorporate, maybe looking at things like swales as part of streets. There's a range of options depending on the site and the context. Yeah, another key thing related to that was this principle of play. Again, this was in response to our large young population that we've got in the district, and having what's called doorstep play close to where people live. Just small spaces where children can play. It doesn't necessarily need to have formal play equipment. But that, again, that can be combined alongside lots of other agendas, like having places for people to sit, which is what the older and disabled people were. That's something they wanted. And thinking around these spaces as well in terms of biodiversity, sustainable urban drainage. So it's having that sort of multi-functional purpose for space. And again, this is the final slide that I'll show from the guide around biodiversity and creating a net gain for biodiversity as part of development, which again, that's looking at things from the neighbourhood scale, and in terms of the open spaces, the streets, the suds areas, making sure they're planted with species or have features that can support wildlife habitats. And then to the individual house itself, looking at things like bird ledges and back bricks and fruit trees and gardens, having gaps in fences to allow small animals like hedgehogs to pass through. So that's about it, really. This last slide is just showing some of the challenges in delivery of the guide. We've got real challenges around the financial viability of development, particularly in those deprived parts of the district, where arguably a lot of these things are needed the most in terms of access to green space, and being able to move around without access to a car. And coupled with that is local authority budgets. They've been reduced over recent years for things like maintenance and management of green spaces and street trees, for example. So that poses a challenge in terms of making these places greener. How we've tried to respond to that is that the guide has a range of different options which can be applied to different sites depending on what's right for which site. So it doesn't necessarily need to mean street trees or a big open space. As I said, there's a range of different options which are set out there. And also the council as well is looking at creating a new city neighbourhood in the city centre area, working in partnership with different bodies and using its own ownership, again to create this a new neighbourhood with quality homes, green spaces and the facilities to support that. Yeah, other challenges as well, accommodating the car, that's a really big issue, the amount of space on developments in terms of not just the highways but the parking as well. Again, we've tried to set out a range of options, parking options, so you're not too dependent on, for instance, ending up with these scenes where you've got cars parked in front of homes alongside the whole street. It's looking at more of a range of that, and again using these green elements to break up the parking and reduce the impact of that. Design skills as well, in terms of how we make this. We in tandem with the production of the guide, we did a training program for council staff and elected members as well involved in the delivery of new. But also there's the on the developer side as well. You often find new schemes being brought forward where a designer or an architect may not even be involved. That's something I think which needs to change. But again, we've tried to focus the guide on being simple and easily understandable for everyone to use, and with those basic objectives that we want to see. Hopefully, it will achieve that. And yeah, just the last couple of points there. The provision of neighbourhood facilities and public transport. That's just about often in trying to create these walkable places, that there are decisions that can be taken outside the control of, say, the local authority or the around these wider provision in terms of how you coordinate public transport around new development, neighbourhood facilities, that could be health facilities or education, for example, where it can move out of a neighbourhood, for example. And yeah, just in terms of COVID-19 as well, a lot of the things we put in the guide have been really important in terms of the crisis, in terms of access to facilities in green space. But there's also the concept as well of the now working from home. Not everyone might be able to work from home. So what about the neighbourhood as a workplace? Do we need co-working spaces, hubs at the neighbourhood scale? So that's it from me. Sorry, I lost connection on for times there.
No, thanks very much for battling through, Stephen. And I think, as my colleague said in the chat, we will share some notes of the session. We'll share Stephen's slides, and I guess we can also provide a link to the design guide if there are any bits people missed and want to catch up on. I thought that was really interesting. I thought your example of Solitaire is really, really interesting, isn't it? Because it's it's a terraced property archetype that's probably found in lots of places in the north, but the combination of that plus the on-site employment, the train station, the public transport links, the green space, and the access to the countryside, and a bit of kind of architectural quality as well, I guess, really does lift it as a neighbourhood and makes it that great place to live. If anybody's ever visited it, they'll know what I mean. And so I just wondered, kind of, you reflected, I think, briefly on the viability challenges in some parts of the district, and obviously Bradford's got a range of different property markets within the whole district. And I just wonder kind of how receptive are developers proven to this, and how challenging or has it been to ensure that the standards are met and kept to?
Right, I'll try my video again. Well, we involved house builders as part of the process in producing the guide, and yeah, we were very mindful that we wanted to achieve a better quality and move the quality of development forward, but we wanted it to be pragmatic and deliverable as well. So that, and a lot of the things that I was talking about there in terms of connections and green streets, the developers are supportive of that. It's just when it gets down to the details of delivery, it needs to be clear who's going to be responsible for maintaining and managing that in the future. And yeah, I mean, it can vary by market area in terms of things like street trees and open spaces are more viable for the developer to maintain in those higher market areas than they are in the more deprived wards of the district. So that, yeah, that's an issue. That's why we set out a range of, there's other ways to make streets greener than just street trees, through what I was talking about, the boundary treatments, using hedgerows for garden boundaries, and sort of landscape front gardens. And yeah.
Just a question for you that's come through on the chat, asking about kind of in light of issues like congestion and the kind of mixed reception for some recent developments in their communal spaces, do you think Bradford's neighbourhoods would still benefit from modular communal homes that are being promoted by modern methods of construction and so on.
Sorry, what was the question again?
Questions about modern methods of construction and whether you think kind of Bradford's neighbourhood could benefit from that. I guess maybe that's about how that kind of approach to building fits with this kind of approach to design and quality.
Definitely, yeah. And again, that's a method that can be more efficient in terms of, particularly for these more challenging market conditions that we have in the district. It can be a way of getting that housing quality. So, yeah, certainly that was an aspiration in the guide as well. And I mean, the guide doesn't. It's just setting out the basic principles that apply to all development, well, whether it's modular or not. But certainly, yeah, we hopefully see a growing role for modular homes in the district. And it was, again, another principle in the guide was that we want to reduce the environmental impact and the energy efficiency, or increase the energy efficiency of homes. And again, modular homes can be one way of doing that. So again, we identified a range of options that developers could look at, and that was an option.
Thank you. Can we bring the rest of the panel in? Brenda, Catherine, Helen. Brilliant. I mean, we've heard now from Brenda with a kind of academic approach to conceptualising this as a 10 to 15 or 20-minute neighbourhood. You know, from Helen about the work that's been on in resilience and in Cumbria, and from Catherine and the example at Hornbeck, and now from Stephen in terms of a local authority that's kind of, you know, adopting this approach. So I'm just wondering how do we bring all this together? And if people are developing their approaches, perhaps through local authority delivery aspects of the Green Homes Grant, you know, people are developing an approach to retrofit, and they're going to be, you know, doing streets and houses that they either own as an RSL or registered provider or housing association, or you know, kind of a coordinating as a local authority. How do we bring this together and ensure that, you know, as we retrofit homes, we're also, you know, taking Brenda's box around transport and all the resilience stuff Helen talked about. It's a massive challenge, isn't it? How do we do that practically?
One of the questions I'd got, Brian, was just if you assume that all of us want more local facilities, not just for housing, how do we get them to happen? How do we, I mean, the example that Helen and Catherine gave in particular is, you know, how do you begin to fund something that the community really wants? Should there be a national fund for, you know, community-owned shops or breweries or bakeries or whatever? And what's the role of a local authority? Those, there you are, those are some of my questions.
I mean, in our situation, we've had real support from the local authority in the fact that they're transferring the asset at nil cost. They're also supporting the Liverpool City region are supporting the community-led housing movement as a viable option as part of their housing strategy. But I guess community land trusts are a little bit different because they do look at that bigger picture of other facilities, and you know, we've relied on funding organisations such as Power to Change that have got specific funds around you know, saving the high street or saving your local pub, but it's where the community drives things in the first place. So and I think that's really important to establish whether there's the appetite from the community, but also from local authorities to create those opportunities for communities to come together and define what they want within that area and how it will benefit. And again, obviously at the moment, that's really challenging because we're based on a community membership, and the membership drive what we do. But, you know, we can't meet at the moment. We can't do all the design process that was done, that led by Airbed, which was fantastic, you know, was through people coming together. So there's that challenge as well of how you engage under current circumstances. But I mean, pulling it all together, I find it very frustrating with all the talk around the green agenda, but the way where the money's been directed, and it all feels very much, it's not addressing the real issues, is it? It's headlines and you know, owner-occupiers being able to say, well, I've got new windows in, or I've had the loft insulated again. It's not genuinely around stuff that's going to have any impact, certainly for people on low incomes, because the grants that are available are tiny bits of money that are going to help if you're going to do the job properly. They'll contribute towards, but they're not going to have much impact. So I think it's almost like matching up what people are saying, what the government agenda is, with what resources are being put behind that, but then demonstrating, like Helen showed in their evaluations, the impact it has on doing something properly in the first place. I think that's the challenge.
Catherine, did I hear from the introduction that you're near Liverpool Football Club?
Yeah, it's literally next door.
Okay, I suggest that you go and ask them for a no interest loan. They should do it for the community, and it'll do so much. You know, everybody will be so proud walking past your lovely new houses and into the football ground. They should do it as a sort of street regeneration.
To be honest, Brenda, we've liaised with LFC. We had their previous chief exec come to our horrible base within the terrace, and he was great and was very supportive, and you know, said, come to us when you're ready with your ask. Obviously the chief exec's changed, but we will be doing exactly that, but actually approaching them around our community share offer so that they can help with their profile, to get that as a national, if not international, campaign.
Yeah.
Plus, we're lucky that we've got benefactors, shall we say, historically, that aren't just based in the UK, that we want to tap into. But it is crazy that you sort of need to do that in order to bring something like this to life.
And I mean, I'm sure I'm talking to, I mean, you know so much about this, Catherine, but I mean, there are people like Triodos Bank and Ethics and Abundance and Energy for all sorts of groups that do community share offers, particularly if there's renewable energy involved with Energy for All, but the others I think are a bit wider. So there are several groups out there that could help you with your community share offer if you don't know anybody.
That's great, thank you.
Stephen, I mean, can I ask, where did the impetus come for your design guide? You know, you got this money from government, and I'm just wondering, kind of in terms of elected members and so on, people at more local level, how do you get them interested in this agenda and to instigate work like you've done in Bradford?
I mean that's where it all sort of stemmed from, really. I mean, we've got the overall district plan for the district, which again is based on these concepts of health, environmental quality, inclusion, growth, and this was a way of bringing all that together at the delivery of housing and improving neighbourhoods. So it all tied into that, and that helped to really get the buy-in to the document and give it that sort of wider profile that it might otherwise have had for a planning document. So yeah, it was very much tapping into the aspirations that were already there within the council in terms of its objectives and its what its elected members were looking for, and the wider stakeholders as well.
Helen, how typical do you think that is? You must operate across a range of local authorities. You've been to Cumbria or Liverpool and so on. Do you see this kind of rising up the agenda of local authorities, or is it patchy? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's quite a few, aren't there, that are developing similar like supplementary planning documents, and obviously there's kind of work at a national level at the minute, which is around developing like the national model design code, which is something that we're working on at the moment. I had an opportunity last year to do some assessments of kind of new housing developments as part of the national housing audit, and yeah, I think it's kind of depressing, isn't it? Because I think, you know, when those studies get repeated, you know, and you find that actually some of the lessons we're still repeating the same mistakes in terms of like, you know, some of the pictures that Stephen showed of kind of lack of connectivity in some of these new developments. But, you know, it's good that we're still kind of repeating exercises like that to kind of keep these things kind of high up there, you know, keep talking about them and keep raising the issue, because I think a lot of people assume that, you know, new development is just inherently going to be better in terms of quality and kind of substance. But yeah, the majority of stuff that is built in the UK sadly is not. So yeah, but yeah, and also doing schemes like you know, the stuff with home baked is good to show what is hopefully possible, you know, and kind of alternative ways of doing it. And also I think, you know, a key thing about the home baked scheme is as well that it is reusing resource that's already there. So, you know, we're talking about zero carbon and kind of embodied impacts is increasingly going to be important, and actually retaining kind of that historical stock and making it into something that is fit for people now and into the future is infinitely better than knocking it down, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that example of Saltaire again, I think it's just, you know, it's 100 years old, but it's a great place to live, and you know, valued by everybody who passes through it. We're just coming up to 2:30, so can I thank all our speakers ever so much, and thank our audience for bearing with us. You'll be aware we had a bit of a technical hitch at one point, but thank you very much for bearing with us. As I said at the beginning, this is about the series of what these webinars we're doing. So each week we're looking at a different aspect of decarbonisation. The next event is on the 21st of October next week, and that's looking at how we decarbonise rural areas and the particular challenges that are involved in decarbonisation in a rural setting. So if you're interested in attending that, it's a free event again. Do register using our mynhc.org.uk site. The week after that, on the 28th of October, we're looking at getting communities on board and education and engagement with residents. I think that's been a continued theme through the Retrofit series about new technologies, new ways of heating homes, and alterations that might need to be made to people's homes to ready them for net zero. How do we engage and work with tenants to make sure that meets their needs too? So obviously, if we were here in person, I would invite you all to applaud. We've had a fantastic panel today. Thank you so much to all four of you for sharing your experience. It's been really valuable. And then we'll be recording of the session coming out afterwards. So thank you very, very much for taking part, everybody.